My name is Jenny Ritchie. For those of you who don't know me, welcome to tonight's gathering. I would like to begin, first of all, I'm not sure whether I need glasses or not, so bear with me. I probably do. Yes, I think I do. I would like to begin tonight by recognising the bravery of people living with epilepsy, their families and their circles of support. We understand that everyone's experience of epilepsy is quite unique. For our community, we are brave in the pursuit of ensuring our organisation is a place where people feel like they belong. We strive to treat everyone with dignity and respect. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands throughout Queensland in which we work and play. We pay our deep and genuine respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, their cultures, their elders, past, present and emerging. So, welcome. It's very exciting to have you all in the room. This is a special edition of our Thinking Outside the Box. Tonight we're live streaming and we're also recording the event, so an extra special welcome to our colleagues and friends who are joining us from all over Australia. I'm just going to cover us a couple of housekeeping before we start. For those of us who are joining us in the room, if you haven't found the bathrooms, they're to the left as you walk out the door. In case of any emergencies, that won't happen, we'll be following the instructions of the cricketers team here. We have two presentations tonight, followed by a Q&A with the presenters and a very special lived experience guest. There will be a 15-minute break in between the presentations where we will be served dinner. For those of you who are joining us virtually, you may like to make yourself a cuppa. Relax for those 15 minutes. But firstly, to help us bring our virtual and our in-person audiences together, we'll be using a program called Slido. So you might see that on your table. You might see it on the screen if I was to change the slide. No, not that quick. There we go. So everyone is encouraged to participate through this program. So we won't be taking questions from the floor. We would ask our virtual participants as well as people in the room to use Slido on their phone. If you'd like to scan that QR code, you can scan and submit your questions to the speakers who will be joining us up here later. So at any time during the presentation, you can do it right now. You can submit a question via the Slido program. And those questions will be reviewed not only by you but by us, and you'll be able to vote for them. If there is a question already up there that you would like to ask, then give it a thumbs up, and that will help us prioritise those questions. So just before we kick off, let me ask you, can you take a look at your Slido screens, and maybe we'll get a sense of people who are in our audience tonight. Can you perhaps get on your screen via the code and let us know where you're coming in from today? If you have any troubles, don't ask me to help. There are team members in the room that can help you. My screen has suddenly died, so I think there's a poll box that you can tick and lets us know. We'll find out later where you're all from, because I don't think it's going to come up on the screen tonight. Everyone being able to do that? Yep. Awesome. Okay, thank you for entertaining me with that. I'm not very helpful when it comes to Slido. I leave the technical stuff to the other guys. All right, so tonight is our 15th year of Thinking Outside the Box Symposium. Traditionally, this is a full-day event solely focused on epilepsy. Tonight, however, we're doing things a little differently. We will, of course, be talking about epilepsy. However, we will also be broadening our conversation tonight by exploring the bigger picture. Why neuro matters. So why does it matter? In 2022, the World Health Organization launched the Intersectoral Global Action Plan on Epilepsy and Other Neurological Disorders, commonly known as the IGAP. This 10-year roadmap calls for a coordinated global response to improve care, improve recovery, well-being, and the inclusion of people with neurological conditions, while also aiming to reduce mortality and disability. Through 5 strategic objectives, the IGAP is shining a long overdue spotlight on neurological conditions, affecting around 1 billion people globally, conditions which have significant social, physical, emotional, and economic impacts. The IGAP is calling on governments, on health providers, on communities everywhere to come together to prioritise neurological health. This global momentum reinforces the need for action at a local level, which means us. And it's why Epilepsy Queensland, along with our neuro partners, launched the Neuro Matters report to raise awareness, to inform decision makers, and to advocate for better outcomes across all neurological disorders. We will hear more about that important report with our first speaker very shortly. Before we begin, though, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge 2 key people involved in this work. Max Wise, Deputy Director General at Department of Families, Seniors, Disability Services and Child Safety, and David Curd, CEO of MS Queensland. Thank you both for joining us tonight and for your continued leadership in highlighting why neuro matters. All right. And now I would like to introduce our first speaker, Chris Doherty. Independent Chair of the Neurological Alliance of Queensland and former CEO of Epilepsy Queensland, Chris brings a wealth of insight into the Queensland neurological landscape. He will speak to the report findings and subsequent developments, including the NAQ's priorities, and update the Queensland Government's $10.45 million commitment to neurological health. Could you please welcome Chris to the lectern?
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to share with you why we believe neuro matters, but I suspect I'm preaching mostly to the converted in the room. Can I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today and pay my respects to the elders past and present and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are with us either in the room today or online. I also want to acknowledge people here today with lived experience of epilepsy and other neurological conditions. Your voices are at the heart of this work. Can I also extend my thanks in particular to Max and David for their partnership in this really important piece of work and to get neuro onto the agenda. So I'm here today as the independent chair. I'll just take one hat off and put another one on for today, of the Neurological Alliance of Queensland and one of the co-authors of the Neuro Matters report to present to you the findings of our report, Need, Impact and Opportunity. This report is the most comprehensive review to date of how neurological conditions are experienced in Queensland, but it's not perfect. There's significant data gaps across the board in everywhere we looked in order for us to have a true sense of what goes on. This report absolutely underrepresents the experience of Queenslanders with neuro conditions. My aim today is to highlight three things. The need. What is the current situation? What does that look like? What does the current data tell us? The impact. What does that mean for individuals, families, and the systems and people in this room and online? And what's our opportunity? What's the pathway forward for reform and improvement? And how can we think about that differently? Neurological conditions are the leading cause of disability in Queensland. Epilepsy alone affects more than 50,000 people. They affect people across the lifespan, from children with epilepsy or cerebral palsy to adults with multiple sclerosis, stroke, Parkinson's, dementia, and often some very rare and challenging conditions. Many neurological conditions share the same issues: difficulty accessing specialists and supports, fragmented services, and stigma and discrimination. Numbers are rising. This is in part due to an ageing population, improved survival rates, and better diagnosis. There's a lot of irony in that statement. For our First Nations people in particular, it multiplies. 3 to 4 times are more likely to experience dementia. 3 times are more likely to experience a traumatic brain injury. And 3.5 times are more likely to end up in hospital as a result of a seizure. Right now, services are fragmented. Health, disability, aged care, and community supports all operate in silos. People fall through the cracks when systems don't talk to each other. Access is uneven. Metro areas often have specialist clinics and supports. Regional and remote Queenslanders face long travel times, long wait times, or simply go without. There are barriers to coordinated care that integrates medical specialists, mental health supports, and community supports. Equity is lacking. Outcomes are too often determined by postcode, by diagnosis, or financial means. People consistently report feeling invisible or overlooked in policy and service planning. For families living with epilepsy, consistently say that they feel invisible in the health system, particularly at key transition points, childhood to adulthood, or in management of treatment-resistant epilepsy. Families describe the complexity of navigating multiple systems and repeating their story over and over and over again. And I'm seeing lots of people roll their eyes and nod at that comment, which I'm sure is infuriating for you all. The call is clear. People want coordinated care, early recognition, and absolute respect for their lived experience. Neurological conditions often mean loss of independence, mobility, and function. For people with epilepsy, the impact is immediate. Seizures can disrupt education, work, driving, independence, and social life. Social isolation is common across all conditions as people withdraw from work and education and community life. Mental health challenges, depression, anxiety, grief are widespread but often unaddressed in the support systems. Carers and usually family members, experience high levels of stress, exhaustion, and financial strain. Neurological conditions cost Queensland $24 billion each year. That's a very conservative estimate, I would say, based on the numbers and the data gaps that exist in this data. But let's say, for argument's sake, it's $24 billion a year. The cost to the health system is enormous. Hospital admissions, specialist care, and ongoing management. In the most recently available Queensland Health data, Queensland is the worst performing state for hospital admissions as a result of a seizure. We're 20% worse than the national average, and we're 40% worse than the best performing state. Productivity losses from people leaving the workforce prematurely or reducing their hours. Carers often reduce paid work to provide care, further compounding the economic hit. And importantly, early intervention and coordinated care are not just humane, they will save us money. Right now, services for epilepsy are stretched. Long wait lists for specialist consultations, limited monitoring beds, and patchy access to community supports. Demand is rising faster than the system is able to cope with. Without reform, existing services will simply become unsustainable. The report makes it clear we cannot afford to continue business as usual. The report does, however, outline a pathway forward, a coordinated neurological strategy for Queensland. And just 2 weeks ago, the National Neurological Alliance published its blueprint for that national plan. So there's movement, there's appetite, there's momentum, there's opportunity for us to get involved. The vision is for people with neurological conditions to live well, with access to timely diagnosis, integrated care, and supports across their whole life journey. We prioritise recognition. Neurological conditions must be identified as a distinct priority in areas of health policy, as they are for cancer and cardiovascular disease. Integration. We must align health, disability, and aged care systems so people experience a single, joined-up journey rather than a maze of complex separate systems. Equity. Deliver fair access to services for Queensland, regardless of location, financial means, or diagnosis, or in some cases, lack thereof. And collaboration. We have to bring government, non-government organisations, researchers, clinicians, and communities together to co-design these solutions. So this is why we published this report in the first place, and it's why we pitched to the election cycle a package of solutions that were not meant to solve this problem. They were meant to start the solution to this problem. The initiatives were designed to be practical, cost-effective, and to be implemented quickly. All the things our politicians like to talk about during an election cycle. So let's be frank about where this came from and how it came about. This was an opportunity to put neuro on the stage during a particular period of time where there was opportunity to give it a voice that it probably never would have had. We argued that there should be an establishment of a neurological alliance of experts and people with lived experience to develop new models of care and guide resource allocation across the package for maximum impact. We argued that there should be the development of a comprehensive neuro care framework to embed collaboration, improve responsiveness, and ensure efficient use of healthcare resources and reduce long-term healthcare burden on the systems. This would come in the form of an action plan, co-designed with lived experience, and ultimately backed by an investment framework well into the future and beyond the life cycle of the current commitment. Because let's face it, $10 million is not going to change the world, but it will start. We would launch a dedicated campaign to raise awareness and promote early diagnosis across all neurological conditions, because we know the earlier people are diagnosed, the faster they move into treatment pathways and the faster they get access to community supports, which ultimately reduces the overall burden on our systems and the impact on families. We also had a package of practical deliverables, and these perhaps are the most contentious components of those program of work. We'd improve access to services and support, especially allied health services, targeted neuro-allied health services, on the ground with the development of 8 neuro wellness hubs in Queensland, including targeting regional and remote areas. We improve access to information and essential resources, support networks, and especially for newly diagnosed folk via an online neuro gateway. And we'd improve navigation of supports between the NDIS, aged care, healthcare and disability care systems via a neuro community navigator network. They were the 6 initiatives that we pitched to government in the $10.45 million package. I can probably talk to you a little bit about where we're up to now, 10 months into that conversation. But that's okay. Government moves at the pace at which it does. If we had Max giving us money, I'm sure we'd have it by now, wouldn't we, Max? But anyway, 100%, yeah, we would have done most of it already. So we've certainly spent some time with our friends and collaborators with Queensland Health to understand the priorities from a political and a practical lens. There's a lot of talk about the hubs. And in fact they're probably the lowest order of priority in our package. So it's an interesting kind of framing that's out in the network, although they do potentially create the greatest opportunity. So it's an interesting conundrum for us to work our way through. So we'll be meeting again with Queensland Health tomorrow to talk more about the hubs and the first prototype of the gateway. So the gateway, very infantile in its thinking at this stage, and probably not as integrated as perhaps we would like it to be, but we all start somewhere. Our dream with the gateway is somebody leaves the room of a clinician with a diagnosis, and by the time they get back to their car, they get a text message that says, "Welcome to the family, we're here to support you." That's the dream. We need to stop this need for individuals to go and seek out information on their own. It's too hard, it's too complex, and it's overwhelming at the point of diagnosis. It's not okay. So we'll keep working on that. So hubs are... So they're probably going to move to procurement processes for the hubs over the next few months, with the idea of standing some or all of them up by the end of the financial year. So that will move reasonably quickly. The Alliance is working on helping inform the scope and the spec of that to make sure it's true to the original intent, and to make sure that when it goes out to procurement, we're getting the outcomes we're looking for, but there's still some work to be done in that space. As I talked about the earlier versions of the gateway, the navigator service model is most likely to be attached to the hubs. There's still some work to do on that. The hubs are the priority at the moment because that's what the Minister would like. And so we're delivering on that because that's important. But the navigator model is the thing that's going to hold those pieces together. And in fact, for organisations or neurological conditions that don't have the joy of organisations like Epilepsy Queensland, the navigator and the hubs is going to be the thing that catches them. And that's why they're actually really important, and that's why the opportunity is great. So I'm often torn by this priority and the emphasis we're putting on the hubs, but there actually is a really great opportunity that sits behind that for everyone that doesn't have an Epilepsy Queensland behind them. The action plan program of work will probably start happening early next year. The goal for us with that would be to have it 100% co-designed by us, for us, with us, to bring back to government just in time for the next election cycle, a program and an investment framework to make sure that this carries beyond the existing commitment. So it's on all of us, every organisation that's part of the Alliance and everyone that's in this room and online, to prove that neuro does matter and to get behind it. It's not perfect, and not every part of this is going to work for every condition. We get that, because everyone's lived experience is unique and different, and that should both be recognised and celebrated. But in reality, with close to 400 neurological conditions, if you put a name on every single one of them, we have to do something collectively to make that work for everybody. And then the campaign will probably flow from the action plan. So the neurological awareness campaign will flow from the action plan. So we're midstream with pieces of work with that. It's moving quickly now that we're kind of in that stage of the thing, but it's taking a lot longer than perhaps we would have liked to. But that is what it is. I think there's really good opportunity in this, and I would encourage everybody to continue to inform the work via your organisations, and in this case, Epilepsy Queensland. Everyone has a voice at this table in order for us to make sure that we can maximise the benefit of this investment for as many people as possible. That's the goal. And can I leave with a closing statement, because I'm pleasantly surprised Jenny hasn't started wrapping me up yet, because that's usually what happens in this forum. Can I conclude by saying that epilepsy is not alone? By moving at a neurological level, we give epilepsy a seat at the policy table. We strengthen our collective advocacy, and we unlock solutions that directly improve lives. For Queenslanders with epilepsy, this isn't just about policy. It's a chance to live well, with dignity and hope. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Chris. I found some of those stats quite confronting, but not surprising. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions being asked tonight about, what's next? How do we actually help? How do we, break it down a bit further? And what do we do? How do we help? So, all right. Before I introduce our next presenter, as many of you already know, epilepsy is incredibly complex, with more than 40 different types and 70 different types of seizures, more than 70 different types of seizures. No two experiences are the same. Each person's journey is quite unique, and so are the challenges that they face. From medication side effects to injuries caused by seizures, from stigma to misunderstanding in the community, to significant economic, social, mental health impacts. The ripple effect of epilepsy is far-reaching. I could add so many more words to that paragraph. Having been supporting people for a very long time, there are so many things that are coming to mind tonight as we're exploring this space, but it's not about me tonight, so I'll keep my mouth quiet. Some will achieve seizure control and relatively stable daily life. And as you will hear from our next presenter, the path to that point can be extremely and incredibly complex and uncertain. For others, seizures will continue, making life unpredictable. As we now turn our focus specifically to epilepsy tonight, we acknowledge that there are no one-size-fits-all solutions. It is complex and it is deeply emotional and personal. It urgently needs innovation. With that, we are delighted to welcome our next speaker, who will share some insights into the future of epilepsy treatment. Professor of Neurology from Monash University, Professor Kwans is a consultant neurologist and the head of the epilepsy clinic at the Alfred Health. A global leader in epilepsy care, Professor Kwans is pioneering the integration of AI into clinical practice. Tonight, Patrick will share insights from the groundbreaking personal trial and discuss emerging therapies, including precision medicine, surgical interventions, dietary therapy, and neuromodulation. Personalised epilepsy care, an out-of-the-box approach. Can I please ask you to welcome Patrick to the stand?
Thank you for the kind introduction. So I have prepared the box, or Tamara has helped me prepare the box, so I will, true to the name of this symposium, leave the box there. Right. So first of all, I'd like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to join this wonderful event in this wonderful venue. You've given me a very good excuse to escape the cold and freezing weather in Melbourne, and I'm so pleased to be here when I landed early today. I want to particularly thank Sandy, I'm not sure where she is, for initially sending me that intriguing LinkedIn message, and for Tamara and Joe, who's been doing all the logistics and forever patient with all my quirky requests and so on. So I want to thank them all, thank them all, and also thank you all for coming, spending your evening here today. So as already introduced by Kelly, there is a lot of variability in epilepsy. And what I'd like to do tonight is to literally take you out of the box journey, outside the box, right? So it's a little different from what Chris just did. He was serious and as we should be. But what I want to do now is to perhaps be a little bit looking at some different approach, and also maybe even provocative at some point. And so you've been warned. Now, as you've heard from Kelly, epilepsy is such a what we call heterogeneous condition. No one person is the same. And for people in the room who are living with epilepsy, or you have family members, you will know that sometimes people say to me, oh, he has epilepsy, I have epilepsy, why are we so different? And one of the reasons is because there are very different causes for epilepsy, and it's not a single condition, we keep saying. It's such a diverse, and essentially any insult to the brain can lead to seizures and lead to an abnormal intrinsic wiring of the brain that causes seizures. So you have a variety of causes, and also including genetics as well. And of course, all our genes are different. This is your personal fingerprint, isn't it? And that different cause of epilepsy can affect different parts of the brain. So you have very different types of seizures as well. And these are just some videos. So that kid was meant to be blowing, and that can cause and induce an absence seizure or absence seizure. And you can range from some very mild type of seizures, very subtle to notice, to the person in the middle, where he had what you might generally recognize as seizures, causing him to move around and convulsion and so on, very severe different consequences. And this variety comes from because our brain is so complex. And as we've heard, we sometimes tend to focus too much, I think, sometimes on seizures, because seizures is just a tip of the iceberg. And for those of you living with epilepsy or your family members, you know that underneath the seizure, there's so much underneath that we often forget. People with epilepsy will also experience other symptoms, cognitive issues, more mood and psychological issues. They have trouble speaking, and there's a lot of stigma still from the society, and there's forever that concern that some of these may even be life-threatening. And a lot of these are underneath and hidden beneath the surface, and we sometimes just think of what is above the water in this tip of the iceberg analogy. As you've heard, we have a number of medications that have been developed for many years, and this slide I showed that actually came from my original PhD thesis. That was more than a quarter of a century ago. I'm showing my age here. But what it tries to show, and I keep updating, is because it shows you how drugs to treat epilepsy have really increased in the past few decades. When I was a student, I thought life as a neurologist was easy in treating epilepsy. You only had a few medications to choose from. For those, sorry for the small print, but if you can see on the screen, you might recognize some of these names. You've got phenytoin, dilantin, Tegretol. These are what we now call first-generation medications. And then when I started my training as a neurologist, I saw my consultant started using some of the new drugs that came to the market at that point. And now we call this the second-generation anti-seizure medications. And again, you might recognize some of these names. But in the last 10 years or so, we are seeing what we now call the third generation of anti-seizure medications that have been developed. And when you see this explosion of new medications, it tells you 2 points. I always say it tells you two things. One, this is great because more choices would give us more ability to personalize or to find the right medication, hopefully for the right, that is best suited for that particular individual. But what it also tells us is that we haven't found the magic bullet. Because if we had, then we'll have to stop. We don't need to stop develop any drugs anymore. So the fact that there's still such demonstrate this is such a still unmet need that we need to invest in developing new treatments for epilepsy. For those who here, I'm not sure if you are policymakers, you've got deep pockets, this is where you should invest. Now, with all these new medications, you might ask, have we made a difference? Have we really helped people with epilepsy? Again, I'm showing you just about seizure control itself. There are many, many aspects. New medications may become fewer side effects, fewer problems, fewer interaction with other medications. But if you're purely looking at whether, say, a population of patients, 100 patients, people with epilepsy, once they start medications, how many would then become seizure-free? And when I say seizure-free, it means no seizure for at least 12 months or more. That is the accepted standard we want to reach because to be able to hold a driving license, you need to be seizure-free for 12 months. And that is having an impact on someone's life. So this is some study we published, and when I was a little kid, we published this paper year 2000. I started small. And that time, we had most of the patients those days were taking the first-generation medications. So remember, in the 80s and 90s, and at that time, about a third of people with epilepsy, once they started treatment, they still had seizures. So they still have uncontrolled, what we call uncontrolled epilepsy. And since then, we have a lot of new medications, as I've shown you earlier. But disappointingly, if you look at the pie chart in the middle, we are still seeing the same 36% in the red segment, in the red part of that pie chart, meaning that if you take a whole population of people, and again, individuals differ, but if you take a whole population level, then we found that, in fact, that proportion has not changed. Very disappointing, even though we're using more and more new medications. And that's mainly for the first and second generation medications. And the question now, what we're trying to answer is, with the third generation medications, what would that pie chart look like? Hopefully we'll be able to present the result in the years to come. So I'm hoping you'll invite me back, then I'll tell you the result next time. And this is sometime when we show this kind of slide pie charts, and most people focus on the red part and say, oh, it hasn't made any difference. But if you look at the other kind of finer details, you see that many people, if they do become seizure-free once they're newly diagnosed, they would do so mostly on the first regimen, first medication. About 40 to 50% of people would become seizure-free. This is the medication we found that right away. But in some people, there's a trial and error, as we just heard from Kelly. We need to find the right medication sometimes, the second one, the third one. After you've haven't been successful with the second or the third try, it becomes harder, but not impossible, but it does become harder and harder. To the extent, I'm sure you may have experienced and have felt, then you just want to give up. You've tried so many, they all have side effects, and why would I try the next one? And so we would think that a lot of people in the red bit, actually, they might have, if they tried the right one, then they might become seizure-free. And also for these people down here, if they had been given the fifth one as the first one, they would have become seizure-free a lot earlier. They wouldn't have to endure, still have seizures, and try the right medication. But we're not able to do that at the moment. And the reason being that a lot of the time when new medications are developed, are tested, they are tested in what are called randomized controlled trials. So I'm not sure how familiar you're with this term. And this is a way where we can scientifically, the most believed to be the most rigorous way to compare two different treatments is to randomize people randomly. And one group of people will receive one treatment and the other group will receive the other treatment. And you compare them. And it can sound, yep, this is what the accepted dogma of clinical trials. And you might think this is very high level because you avoid any bias and it's accepted by the scientific field. But the problem is when you randomize and like that, then there's no individualization. Everyone has the same condition. You ignore everything else. You ignore their personal characteristics. They may have other conditions. They may have other history, mental health problems, and they're totally ignored. You just look at their seizure type and then just randomize. And so what happens is that when we did that for epilepsy, and this is a slide with lots of alphabets. So basically, these are acronyms of different medications that we treat for epilepsy that have been subject to this kind of trials when two medications are compared, what we call head-to-head, right? So when you compared these drugs, and what I'm trying to summarize here is when you see a purple arrow, probably not showing up very well, that means when the medications are compared this way, if you look at the whole population, the same number or proportion of people responded. You couldn't find a difference. When there's a red arrow means one is better than the other one. So we have a lot of purple arrows, meaning that a lot of the time we cannot find a difference between them. Not to say that there's no difference, but it's because we randomize and you compare the people as a group, not as an individual. Right? So when you do it like this, then what ends up, it becomes a lot of, the choice of medication can sometimes be very randomized, random. Now, what I mean by that is, so this is my box. You've been wondering what's in this box, haven't you? Yes, that's why you're paying attention. So I need some volunteers. I'm going to have some volunteers. Yes, okay, volunteers. Do you want to stand up? I'll give you a mic. Hope this works. There you go. So what's your name?
My name's Kelly.
Kelly, very well. Now, I've got a few balls here, and I'm trying to guess what kind of sport you play. So,
I look
so
sporty.
you can guess from your size, and how about a a footy. Do you want to catch? I'm not sure. I'm sure I'm not throwing it away. Very good catch. Well done. Round of applause for Kelly.
Patrick, I can tell you're from Melbourne. This is wrong. You're wrong code, mate. Should be rugby league. Go Maroons.
Wrong drug. Wrong drug. All right. You can take a seat. What about someone? I can do better. Okay. Who else? Who wants to volunteer? Down there? All right. Okay. Yeah. I don't want to kick any expensive champagne off the table, so when you do come up. Hold your mic. What's your name?
Olivia.
Olivia. Very well. Very good. Now, so from your color, based on what you dress, I can guess what you like. Do you want to catch? Okay. Let me hold the mic for you.
What's so funny, Leonie?
Well, close. Try again. Tennis. All right. Do you play tennis?
I used to play tennis.
Used to play tennis. So got it right the first try. Thank you. Well done. But what if she doesn't? What if she doesn't? Then I have to throw another ball, right? I've got another ball here, a epilepsy color ball, a purple one. Yep. So there's a lot of trial and error, and it shouldn't be like that. So how can we move forward? So in reality, what happens is when you see your doctor, and this is a group of experts that try to come up with a way, an algorithm, to help us choose the right medication. So look at the seizure type, and then lean forward. There's a lot of small prints, literally. These are fine small prints. And these are around, whether that individual has diabetes, do they have bleeding problems? I have to lean closer. I need to change my glasses. Other conditions, what medications they're taking. And run through a list of possibilities to come up with some sort of recommendation. And this is a group of experts come up with this algorithm. You can supposedly go to the website, click your information in. Now, I think this could be very useful, particularly for non-experts, to navigate all the different properties of the medications we have, because they're all actually quite different. But this complexity, in fact, is best suited to a new form of intelligence. So that's artificial intelligence. And that's how your electric car, your Tesla, can drive around. I can see Chris drives a Tesla. Is that Tesla? No. Maybe not in Queensland, not as many. And because it can take in a very complex information and find out hidden pattern. So you've probably heard of AI and machine learning and deep learning, and what does it all mean? So I asked ChatGPT to help make up this graph. So this is actually ChatGPT made it. And essentially, these are basically different types of ways you analyze the data, the information, to come up with a different task. It's like driving a car, or like ask ChatGPT to write you an essay. Even they can do slides for you. And with ChatGPT is a form of deep learning. So when it's deep learning, what it really means doesn't necessarily mean is deep. It means it's got depth. So the information is passed through layers of metaphorically neurons, like network, a bit like neural. That's why it's called neural network. So it passes through different layers to come up with an end product at the end. And that's why it's got depth. That's why it's called deep learning. And so given the complexity, in fact, I think epilepsy, or trying to find the right intervention or treatment for someone with epilepsy, this is ideal, an ideal application of AI in medicine. So that's what we developed, is a model called a transformer model. So for those who haven't heard of what transformer is what the T in ChatGPT stands for. So it's a way of looking at serial information to come up with a task at the end. And we apply this to see whether we can develop a model to predict whether the treatment will be successful in someone with newly diagnosed epilepsy. So the first medication. Now you might say, actually we're not solving the drug-resistant problem, but this is the lowest hanging fruit, if you like. This is the proof of principle, because this is the first medication we didn't have to worry about, drug interactions and so on. So we picked this as a proof of concept, and because we wanted to make it applicable or generalizable to as many people around the world as possible in different settings, remote, regional, resource-limited setting, we use information that is routinely collected in everyday clinical care. So just look at these factors. These are things that your doctors probably would have asked you when you see them the first time. Have you got family history? Have you had a febrile seizure? Have you had head trauma? So these are information already collected. And we're also taking some of the results from the, again, standard tests, the EEG and MRI, and these are all recorded in the clinical records, in the medical records already. And we included nearly 1,800 patients from 5 different centers around the world in 4 countries, including Glasgow was the data I showed you earlier, and we had a center in Perth as well, and a couple in China and one in Malaysia. And we did that deliberately. You might say, why? These are places so different. The ethnicity is different, the practice is different, but that's deliberate because we wanted to see whether the model could be generalizable. It's no good you develop a model that only works for a particular, very narrow group of people. So we did that, and the model has a reasonable performance. It predicted reasonably well whether that individual with epilepsy, when they were given the medication, would respond, because we know they respond. We've got the actual outcomes of the treatment. So we compare how the model predicts and the actual response to see whether it matches or not. So that's how we assess the so-called performance of the model. And the model performed reasonably well. Now, what the model can do is, in addition to just coming up with a prediction of response to the drug the person was given, it can also learn from the other people, because we had 1,800 people there. So we can learn, and a lot of people were given different medications. As it turns out, there were 7 common medications the patients were given. You know the usual culprits, your Tegretol and Dilantin, and sorry, not being commercial here, but the standard sort of drugs. So what the model then learns is to learn from other patients, other people, and then for each person, it can actually predict whether the person would also respond to the other medication or not respond. What is the chance of responding to these other medications that they haven't been given? So what do I mean by that is, I plot this, this particular individual in this slide here. So on the bottom here, you've got, these are just numbers of patients. We randomly picked 100 people from these 1,800 people. And on the vertical axis here is the probability of the person becoming seizure-free when they were given this medication, if they were, I would say. So for this individual, patient X, we call them, based on the model, levetiracetam would be predicted to have the highest probability of helping the person seizure-free, 0.7 something. So 1 is 100%, that's a 70-something% chance. That's a decent chance, whereas topiramate would be predicted to be the lowest chance. Now this is just prediction, right? But that's this, and we need to obviously test the model many, many more times, more data and so on. But at least at this stage, this is what the model can tell us. So each person, this person, they hadn't tried all 7 medications, but because the model has already learned from their fellow patients, then it can come up with this prediction. So what do you think the other people probability or prediction look like for the other individuals? So we get a spread, right? So we have a spread, and each person will have 7 of these, each symbol, 7 of these medications. You can come up with a prediction, and you can see some people have lower probability, very low chance predicted to respond to any of these 7 medications. Whereas some people up here on the right-hand side, they will be predicted to respond to anything they're given. So in those cases, you might look at side effects and so on, and to find of these likely responding medications. And so if a model can do that, then the obvious next question would be if we can predict that for this patient X, and we know that there's drugs predicted to be more likely to be successful and drugs less successful, then why would you not give the one predicted to be more successful? Why would you still go to the usual way, which is random, and select those at the bottom, or end up selecting those at the bottom? So this actually would allow your doctor and together with the people living with epilepsy to select medications to guide how they select the medication. Let's pick those at the top, not those at the bottom. Now, it sounds all very well in theory. This is looking at data we've already collected. How to improve it has to be done prospectively. And this was the trial that Kelly mentioned earlier, that we are putting this model to the test in a clinical trial where we randomize someone, all people who, these are adults, newly diagnosed with epilepsy, will be randomized into two different groups. One group would receive the usual care, where the neurologist would just choose the drug like what we normally do based on their experience, the knowledge, and so on. Whereas the other group, the neurologist is the AI group. The neurologist will receive recommendation from the model and say, this drug would be predicted to be most likely to work for this particular person sitting in front of you, taking into all the accounts of their personalities, their characteristics, and so on. And we follow the patients up for 12 months. And this is a multi-center study performed around Australia. And we do have a center in Brisbane here, the Royal Brisbane Women's Hospital. And in assessment, we assess whether how the patients will respond to they become seizure-free, also side effects and quality of life, and the mood and the cognition as well. And importantly, we also assess whether this will be cost-effective. Is it going to help, if people can become seizure-free sooner, and there may be less attendance less need to go to emergency department and won't be admitted to hospital. So would that bring cost saving to the healthcare system as well? And I think there are some people working from the councillors and the government here, so this could actually bring savings. And I think also importantly, the last bit is to look at whether this will be acceptable to all the stakeholders. How would the patients feel? How would the neurologists feel about this? Using an AI system to guide them to use medication. And what will be the ethical impact if one day we're going to roll this out as a standard of care, not just research. And so we're lucky to have a philosopher embedded within the team. And he would go out and interview the neurologists and the patients. And so it was who has a lot of look at the ethical side. And never did I imagine I would collaborate with a philosopher in my research. So here we are doing research with philosophers. This created actually quite a bit of media attention, such as The Age around this headline. And so if you're interested, we can also get ChatGPT to see you if you're interested. Now changing gear a little bit. So far I've talked about mainly about clinical information and so on, but we know, as I said in the beginning, we all differ in terms of our biogenetics. And this is a slide of what I call tale of two curves. So one curve, left-hand side, you can see the plummeting cost of doing what we call genome sequencing in an individual. So when I was a student, when I was doing my PhD, I was so excited because the human genome was mapped for the first time. And there was a headline running. And James Watson, who was one of the Nobel Prize winners, he said, a monkey can do it. But then it costs billions of dollars. Nowadays, I've been told, the latest is you can do your whole genome sequence, 2 billion base pairs sequenced, by just with under $100, $100. I'm not sure how much you pay for this meal, but you can have your genome sequenced. Obviously, the informatics and analysis would cost still a lot of time. You need experts to analyze all the data, store the data, but the technology sequence, the cost is so low. And what it means is that there's been explosion of genes we've discovered for epilepsy. There are now hundreds, if not up to 1,000 genes that are recognized to cause epilepsy. And every one of these genes also have a lot of different point mutations or changes as well. And armed with this knowledge, this is a no-brainer. We really should look at genetics. If I could have my way, I think every patient should have, or every one of us should have a whole genome sequencing done, because it can really guide us to personalized treatment. So what we're doing as a next version of the model is to incorporate genetic information into the model, teach the machine, give the genetic information to the machine to learn, and also more complex information, the EEG findings, all these regular lines and tests that you have wires in your head, they are actually very useful. And all the scans or the MRI, however claustrophobic and uncomfortable they are, they have wealth of information that can guide us, not just diagnosing, but also choosing the right treatment. And all these can be fed into a machine learning model for the machine to learn to come up with the best prediction. So we've just got a paper accepted by one of the top journals in the field. So this will then really, I think, get us to both personalized, because it's all is individualized, and precise and precision medicine by looking at the genetics. Now, changing gear, do you know what these are? Who knows what these are? Neurons, yeah, neurons. So what you're seeing are neurons and astrocytes, or the supporting cells as well, and that's grown and stained by some very talented postdocs in our group. And what you're seeing under a microscope, these are neurons with different, looking at the strands, how they're connected. And nowadays and these are actually from people with epilepsy. But before you think that we'll just take a bit of brain from a bit of neurons from the brain, they're actually grown from stem cells. So nowadays you could grow neurons from stem cells that are derived from just a simple tube of blood. A few milliliters of blood can be turned into what are called stem cells. And from the stem cells, we can then, by different ways, make the stem cell develop into different types of cells, neurons or cardiomyocytes or heart cells, liver cells, to study. And we're doing that not just to make pretty pictures, but because the cells, they come from that particular individual, so it retains all the genetic information of that individual. So it becomes a model, a mini-me, if you like, of that individual characteristics. And these are not just pretty to look at, because these neurons, they create signals, they have activities, they fire, yeah, your neurons fire. So to measure it, again, Ben Rollo is another postdoc in our group. We use what is called an array of electrodes. So these are little picture here. So we grow them in a plate. So each plate has 24 wells. So each plate is about the size of your phone. And you've got 24 little wells, little holes. And each well, we can put in up to 100,000 neurons. So lots of mini-me's, 100,000 mini-me's in there. And what they do is they have activities. And we measure them by these electrodes. So each well at the bottom have 12 electrodes. They are separated by 700 micrometer. That's less than 1 millimeter apart. So very dense, but because the neurons are so small. So each electrode will be able to take recording from the neurons around it and some activities. And by doing that, we can understand what the neurons would look like that are derived from that individual. So here I show you, this is running. You see these signals, so it gives a burst of signals. Right? This is a normal background, and the red bit is it kind of bursts every now and then, another burst. And each of these small rectangle are recording from one electrode. So there are 12 here, and you can see when it's mature, they all fire together. The bursts come together because they form a network, just like our brain. They're synchronized. So that's why they fire together. You see this blue burst. So what do you think if we have something from a person living with epilepsy? what would the pattern look like? So this is signals from a person living with epilepsy who has a genetic form of epilepsy, and that gene affects a particular ion channel, so-called affects the in and out of the electrolytes, of the ions in the brain, so it's more active. So you can see on that individual, you can see the blue parts, they're closer together, more frequent. But they're shorter as well, but they're more bursts, they're busier. And with these, then there's a way you can then, by looking at the pattern, understand the nature, what the epilepsy, what the genetic cause in that individual, in the actual cells that derive from that individual. Rather than look at animals, we can actually look at what happens from the individual. And so this is just to show you, we're not just to make pretty pictures and make music. In fact, we are using it as a way to find new treatment and a new way to take medications. And this is a project what we call PERSIST. That's in fact in collaboration with University of Queensland, with doctors at Brisbane Hospital as well, Lata Valamudi, Ernst Wolfitang, and others between University of Queensland and Monash University. We at this collaboration where we collect samples from people with epilepsy, some with known genetic mutations, so these are different types of genetic causes of epilepsy. We exchange them. In our lab, we grow them into the two-dimensional stem cells I showed you. In Professor Wolfie's Tang's lab, he grew them into organoids, little balls of brain, and to study them. And we use them for drug screening, and then we apply AI to analyze the data and to predict response and see whether they match with the patient's response. So in this way, we can help, again, another way very much allows us to personalize the treatment selection, and also as a model to even develop new treatments as well that we haven't been able to test because of the limitation of doing animal studies and so on. This way, we can test them on a petri dish and much more efficiently, cost-effectively as well, and hopefully bring drugs to clinical testing much earlier. So if you ask me what I think the graph will look like, this in the timeline will look like by 2025, it works. Okay, I think we're going to see AI generation of medication in the next 25 years. So just to conclude here, I'm hoping I've shown you that there is insight personalized epilepsy management. We are in the cusp of transitioning from one size fits all, try and error, to a personalized approach in managing epilepsy. And to do this, we must collaborate and with other groups, also with people with lived experience, other organizations, and all the stakeholders. And the benefit we bring will not be just people living with epilepsy, but the entire society, because the improvement. So at the end, I'd like to acknowledge all the postdocs and students in my group, all the collaborators, all the people with epilepsy, the families and the carers, and the people who have been brave enough to give us funding to do this work, and we need more funding to be able to develop this new treatment. And what we are hoping here, and I really like what Chris said, that vision of alliance, is I do think we need to join hands. And we have a vision, we imagine a new way of research and care for people with epilepsy and other neurological conditions, and where we can unify different research efforts all around the country and find a way that can foster innovation and also sustainable. It has to be, how do we commercialize? How do we make it available? Because if we don't commercialize the discovery from universities, they sit under the ivory tower. How do we engage industry, people to invest and to make this innovative treatment available? And we need to promote collaboration all around and increase awareness. And what you're doing tonight is fantastic, wonderful to do that. So I'm calling for everyone to put your hand up if you're going to join this effort. Yes? Do I hear yes? Do I hear yes? Do I hear yes? Yes, good. So let's do this and make music and not war, all right? Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Wow, is all I can say. We'll definitely be inviting you back. Yes, sit down. I'm now thinking of all the community members that I've been supporting just in the last month, that I've got some real live hope to share with them about medications, etc. So thank you so much. All right, where are we going from here? Lots of questions coming. Can I invite Chris and Patrick to come up? I'd also like to invite Louise Ryan to come and join the discussion. And I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our very special guest, Louise. Louise is the Secretary of the Board of Epilepsy Queensland and has been a proud member of our organisation for over 30 years. Drawing on her deeply personal journey from life-changing brain surgery at 14, joining the merry-go-round of medications to a relapse and a recent seizure after more than 2 decades, Louise was inspired to a career in public policy and advocacy, reigniting a passionate voice for better models of neurological care. So thank you for joining us, all of you, actually. I'd like to start with a couple of questions for you, Louise, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Jenny.
New kid on the block. The others have had their say for a bit. In the meantime, if I could ask our team members to perhaps prioritise some of these dozens of questions that are coming through so that we don't waste too much time moving forward. Louise, can I first of all ask you to take a few minutes to tell us a little bit about your journey thus far? Your epilepsy journey, that is.
Yeah, sure, Jenny. And thank you so much for the opportunity to speak tonight. It's a real privilege. So I was diagnosed with epilepsy when I was 4 years old. It began with simple and complex partial seizures. And when I was 7, the tonic-clonic started. So I had the privilege of having all 3 versions of seizures from the videos that Professor Kwans showed earlier, which is the case for many people with epilepsy. The tonic-clonics paused for a few years, but they came back with a real vengeance just before my 12th birthday. 10 days before my birthday, I had a tonic-clonic seizure that lasted for 3.5 hours. We were in the emergency department at the rural hospital in Stanthorpe, where I grew up with Mum and Dad. And the local GP was on the phone to my neurologist in Brisbane constantly over that period of time, and they were minutes away from calling the helicopter to take me to Brisbane, and they tried one last dose and the seizure stopped. The next day, the GP told me the amount of medication in my body that night was equivalent to 3.5 cartons of beer. The fact I came out alive with full motor skills and basically about 90% cognitive function still really blows my mind to this day. After that, my seizures became uncontrollable. I was having about 100 a day between simple and complex partials, and the tonic-clonics were happening every 6 to 8 weeks, uncontrolled, and wouldn't stop without midazolam administration. No medications were working at this point. My parents, Kerry and Veronica here, who are here tonight, are my biggest backers through this, and I'm really pleased that they're here tonight. Mum in particular was my fiercest advocate, and anyone who's lived with a nurse knows they're not to be messed with, and my doctors learned that pretty quickly. Without her, I wouldn't be here right now. So with 7 medications tried and failed, surgery became the next option. The road was long, almost 2 years, 3 lots of inpatient EEG telemetry, countless scans, neuropsych assessments at both the Mater and the Sydney Children's Hospitals. And in the lead up to the surgery, the peer support Epilepsy Queensland provided made all the difference to our family. So in October 2003, I underwent a left temporal lobectomy, and just like that, the seizures stopped overnight. Post-surgery, this was my ticket to freedom. It meant I could move away from home, get my driver's license, go to university, and eventually achieve financial independence. But I never lost the awareness that seizure control doesn't mean seizure-free. Even when I bought my apartment in 2015, despite being 12 years seizure-free and no longer on medication, I still made sure I was near public transport and amenities just in case it ever came back. Then the following year, in 2016, they did come back, and the relapse devastated me. I had to leave my job, my mental health collapsed, my relationship at the time became unstable. And looking back, I can see my partner wasn't just unsupportive, he was dismissive. At one point, he even accused me of lying about having a seizure because simple partials aren't visible. That moment cut me deeper than the seizures themselves. So after the relapse, we jumped back on the medication merry-go-round all over again. But at 26, my options were more limited because I wanted to keep the option of having a family. So over the next 3 years, we trialled another 7 medications. So that's 14 across my lifespan. Each new drug came with hope, and each seizure with crushing disappointment. One medication finally started to make a difference, but it caused severe heat rashes and kidney stones. My neurologist had to take me off it. I begged them to let me stay on it because if kidney stones were the price for seizure freedom, I was willing to pay it. Another time I ended up in the Mater ED with a rash and a fever after my pharmacist friend told me bluntly, "Lou, if you don't go to hospital tonight, you will die." He saved my life that night. Eventually we found the right mix, but not without scars and not without cost. Last year, I had my first tonic-clonic seizure in 21 years. Thankfully, one small medication adjustment stabilised me, and I've now been seizure-free for over 12 months. And there was part of Professor Kwans' presentation with that EEG with the sound that really resonated with me because the way I described the feeling in my brain leading up to that seizure to a friend was my brain felt noisy. So that really resonated. So I think that's all for question 1. Yep, that's all. Thanks, Jenny.
That's all.
Sorry.
That's all sounds a little bit pales into significance, doesn't it? That's all. That's a fairly big journey, and I'm sure there's quite a few people in the room who can relate. Yeah, I'm seeing nodding. Chris or Patrick, do you have any comments on Louise's very personal journey?
No, thank you, Louise, for sharing that. I always found it very, very courageous and moving, and I learn a lot. When I hearing what you said. Sometimes I think when we practice, we take a snapshot. When we see the patients in a very brief consultation, and we rarely follow such a long journey. So this is very. I think what you've shared, give us a lot of inspiration and motivation, to do better, and we're trying hard. Thanks.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest privileges of my life was being CEO of this organisation and hearing these stories day in and day out, and really driving the purpose for why we do what we do. And I'm sure the team at EQ would share the same sentiment. And post-Epilepsy Queensland life, these stories drive my contribution to the Alliance and why I want to stay connected to us thinking about this differently, because it has to change. The opportunities are in front of us, and and it's our opportunity to change the trajectory for people like Louise and many of you in this room by thinking about it and doing it differently.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you,
I'll
Patrick.
also say, and I think having the family support and my mum and dad being here, this is just so wonderful. So it's, thanks for sharing.
Louise, is there another impact, another burden to your journey?
Yeah, Jenny, I think for any of us with epilepsy or most neurological conditions for that matter, it's like the iceberg effect that was in Professor Kwans' presentation. I do have a couple of notes on here. If you give me one moment, sorry. So one thing I did really want to talk about is the cost of having a chronic health condition.
Financial cost or?
The emotional cost is huge too, and the opportunity cost, but predominantly the financial cost, because even with all the support that I have had from Epilepsy Queensland, from my parents, seizure freedom comes at a high cost. So for me now, each year I spend about $2,500 a year on medication. Add on to that neurologist appointments, psychologists, psychiatrists, GP appointments, that's another couple of thousand. Then I've got my private health cover, which a lot of people can't manage on top of that. So that's, we're getting up to 10 grand a year just to stay stable, just to stay seizure free. And I'm lucky that I can afford it. And I asked my neurologist once, when the PBS fees were getting quite high, I was struggling to afford my medication at that point in time. And I said, well, I'm in a decent enough position that I can make this work, but how does a single mum on a pension pay for her medication? And my neurologist said she doesn't, and she keeps having seizures. And I have a huge moral problem with this. And I just really want to make this point because it's really clear, because it's so important, and Chris touched on it earlier. Seizure control should never depend on a person's postcode, their income, or their capacity to self-represent. But the reality is, in the current system, it does. Yeah, and that's where our work at Epilepsy Queensland is really crucial, right? Because we need to be a voice for those people who can't, and to help manage seizure first aid at home through the wonderful training programs that we offer, so they don't have to navigate the behemoth of Queensland Health on their own, because it is a behemoth and it's really hard, I think, even for people who work within it. So,
Absolutely. Thank you. That's really helpful. I came into this particular role with a vision of having a worker, a team member in every city in Queensland, because I'm a Queenslander, and I thought that was achievable. But, having a worker in every town was not going to solve some of the problems that you're talking about. So it feels like, well, I failed miserably. And when I hear these things, it makes me a little angry. We need to be able to do better, and we need to band together, as Patrick was saying. Let's go forth. Thank you so much for sharing that. I've got quite a few questions here, and prioritising them is going to be difficult. Number one, because I can't see what I'm looking at. One of the other things that I'm failing in is getting used to getting older. All right. Chris, I saw one come up for you, and I was pretty keen to ask you this question. To Chris, this in words is a simple question, but it very much may not be. How do we, as diagnosed adults, help change the systemic views of our politicians and their funding?
There's a simple and a complex answer. The simple answer is tell your story. That's the simple answer. Every opportunity you have to stand in front of those politicians, tell your story. It's the most powerful way to change people's view of the world. The complex answer to that is we all need to do the storytelling together, and we need to do that in a cohesive, consistent and collaborative way, as far-reaching as we possibly can, to get the agenda started and the actions moving. But start with telling your story.
As someone that's quite passionate about the narrative, we need to tell that story loudly, don't we? It's not just listening to our friends talk. It's more. Thank you. I've got a lot of questions here and we are running late, so I just want to apologise first of all. We may not get to them all, but we will get some answers for you if they're really important. And anyone who does need to go, I'm just letting you know. I'm going to hang in there, so I'm hoping you can, as well as the rest of you. Patrick, did you have, or Louise, did you have anything to add to that last question? No? Let me then pose one to Patrick. Given the music in the ion channels, are you also looking at people with control seizures but ongoing abnormal EEGs? Can we assume the music plays long into the night?
Yeah, that's a very interesting thought. I mean, it would be interesting to compare, the music sound differently, between people who respond and not respond to different treatments. And when we give different medications, how would that change the music? And I'm also curious to know whether each of us has our own music. Would your music be the same as mine? And what about in the family? Would the family members, your brothers and sisters' music sound more similar? Can you tell whether they are from the same family or not? And I think going even further is if you listen to your own neuron playing your own music, would it have a better effect on you? Would it make you calmer because it's in your rhythm? And maybe it can be a form of helping anxiety and other mental issues as well. So there's a lot we can explore, and I think we're just touching the tip of the iceberg.
Thank you. I can imagine what people would think about the music that's going on in my head.
Hadn't even crossed my mind, Jenny.
Oh, yeah, don't go there. I don't understand this question. I'll just put my hand up. One common concern with AI is that it will hallucinate or fabricate data when it is unsure. Is there risk of this when using AI to predict anti-seizure medication in your study?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was hoping someone raised that because
Yes.
because there's a lot of hype around AI, and I think we are in the hype stage. So that's why we embedded. We have look at the ethical side, and we have to be very rigorous and very critical of our own work as well. And so you need to repeatedly verify the information before we can roll this out. And so I think what we are looking at, that's why, is to look at not just one piece of information, but multiple pieces of information that all cross-check each other. And I'm very passionate about testing it in a clinical trial prospectively, just like any medication or treatment come along. It can't be just rely on the old information, because it has to make sure that it does work in the real world as well. So at the moment there is what's happening, say, in the FDA in the US, Food and Drug Administration. This level of rigor hasn't been there. That's been a concern. And a lot of the models, in fact, you may or may not be aware, if you actually walk in the hospitals, it's already being deployed in, say, radiology. They're using it to read X-rays and CT scans and so on already, sometimes without us knowing. And that's because the regulators are behind, I think. But how do you balance against, innovation, getting something out quickly, and the harm. And I think this is an area, and I want to echo what Chris said, that we, I think the stakeholders and most affected, you must raise your voice. You must let them know. The policymakers, and why it's important. Otherwise, there is a risk if ChatGPT hallucinates when you write an essay, may or may not matter that much, but if it's choosing a medication and so on, then it's a different matter. Maybe the essay is very important as well. I'm not downplaying importance of essays, but the consequence of here could be even more. So I think there is an argument I think we should apply much higher bar for this, but then how do we balance against getting the innovation and not stifling innovation? This is a very fine balancing act.
Yeah, and that's not easy, is it? No. Thank you, Patrick. Louise, thank you for your bravery in sharing your story, says this question. What advice would you give a woman living with epilepsy looking into the future? Life can be so uncertain and there's more complexity as a woman, hormones, etc.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny, and thanks to the questioner. It's actually quite poignant. For me, recently I had some reproductive health issues earlier this year and needed to undergo some surgery. And post-surgery, my mental health collapsed quite significantly. And I went back and I thought, my mental health collapsed a fair bit, in the last 12 months on and off. And I went back and I looked at the calendar and I was like, this is all happening within a week of my period every time. What the hell? And so then I looked up catamenial epilepsy, hormonal epilepsy, and I was like, this makes a lot of sense. This is all ticking boxes for me. And so I went and saw my neurologist and basically had a discussion about it, and we agreed, that's probably highly likely. And so then that's been a bit for me to process recently in terms of, I touched on earlier medication choices if you're wanting to have children and breastfeed is one aspect of it. But now with the catamenial epilepsy, that has been a new journey for me to unpack and think about, well, how do I prepare for perimenopause and how do I prepare for menopause? The good thing is having the diagnosis now and knowing in advance that those are likely high-risk periods for me to have a seizure relapse. That means we can prepare. But a lot of women don't find that out and don't know. And then you get caught, for women wanting to have children, you do get caught where you find the medication that actually finally works, but it can cause birth defects. And you have to make really difficult, impossible decisions over what's more important, my baby or my seizure control. And, that can be a really hard conversation to have with your neurologist because they don't necessarily always say what you want them to. So, I guess the advice that I would give women is, be kind to yourself, and it is a more complex journey as women with all of those other factors to consider. But my advice would be just to be brave and take it one day at a time, because that's all I do.
Yes, obviously. And I think, bravery and also speaking up about these things, because quite often not everyone will agree that it is hormonal. Let's trust the gut. Hey, thank you. All right. There was a really good one and I've lost it now. Will the hubs be located in the existing medical clinical hubs? An impossible one to answer.
The diplomatic answer to that is I don't know. So the likely outcome is Queensland Health will take the hubs to an open procurement process. So at the moment, the Alliance is working to inform the scope of that to make sure the principles, the outcomes, the evaluation, the the importance of the connection to specialist support services like EQ and MS and others are embedded in the principles of the design. So it's possible that's where they'll end up. Is that by design? No. So in fact, quite differently to that by design. The intent of them were for them not to be clinical spaces. So that, the original design of them were meant to be places for people to come and be and share and tell stories and access, relative allied health mostly services that might be appropriate in those areas, and some of the evolving discussions around that are about the finite. I think that the number is, Dan, you could probably tell me more accurately. There's only probably a couple of hundred neurologists in Queensland, and so the funnel's quite. 150 is probably a reasonable estimate. It's AI generated. We'll have AI neurologists all over the place. Yep. Yeah. Chat neuro. Yep. Happy days. I think we're all excited about that. So I think when you think about 1.3 million Queenslanders live with a neurological condition, and they're all shoved down a pipeline of 150 neurologists. A good chunk of those are in southeast Queensland. At the raw end of the data, for people living with epilepsy, if you live in Cairns, you are 240% more likely to end up in hospital as a result of a seizure than you are in Brisbane. That's the disparity of our geographical disbursement in our healthcare system and the deployment of resources across it. That's a fact, it's a reality. So the goal with the hubs was to create a place for people to come and be and access peer support, whether that's specific to the condition that they're working with or people that have commonality, because there are a lot of commonalities across neurological conditions in terms of people's lived experience. There's certainly some disparities, and there's certainly some quite widespread things from MND, which is terminal at the point of diagnosis, and their engagement in things is very different to perhaps somebody living with epilepsy that has a reasonable degree of seizure freedom. So people's needs are different and unique everywhere, but the goal for the hubs was about creating a space that was not clinical, that it allowed us to start thinking about, and I use this term loosely because I'm not a clinician, a neurological workforce that aren't just centred around neurologists. So what does that look like? What does neurophysio look like? And how do we through this program of work actually generate the demand for more specialists in those areas? People that do physio and OT and other allied health professions that have a special interest or a specialisation in neurological conditions or a neurological condition. So they're all the things that can manifest from this idea of creating a place for people to come and be and be comfortable and be themselves and access the types of supports that they need. So by design, you would probably say it doesn't fit well in a clinical setting in an ideal world. So the true answer is I don't know, because the procurement process will be the procurement process, and hopefully we've designed it well enough for it to land where we'd like it to land. But at the end of the day, that was the intent. That was the pure intent behind the hubs.
The intent sounds perfect. I just hope it goes down that road. Thank you, Chris.
If I could just add something quickly onto that, Jenny, I think just from an Epilepsy Queensland point of view, having shared spaces with other people with other neurological conditions is a really important step in the right direction. But within our organisation and our community, we have a really important role in ensuring that our needs are met in the service design, because we are the most common neurological condition, but we're also the most invisible. And so we have a really important job during this consultation process to make sure that we're always getting a seat at the table and making sure that we're always part of the conversation, because that invisibility can have a real impact on support services.
And I think that's very true and very relevant. And I think the importance of that is when we go back to the pure intent of the hubs. Let's be realistic about what they're actually going to be and what problems they're actually going to solve. I think in political wisdom, we've turned this concept of this hubs, which had a nice, pure, clean intent about it, into something that somebody could stand in front of and cut a ribbon on, right? And so we've created this thing that probably wasn't its original intent. And so, to your point, Louise, it's about perhaps we also need to scale back the expectations of people about what those things or places are and what their intent is. And so therefore it's actually a lot easier for each of the voices to be heard, because as soon as you make it more complex or closely clinical aligned or all those types of things, it makes it a lot harder to meet all of the needs of the different groups. And so let's be realistic about what they are and what they're designed to be, and put some good, robust evaluation measures around them so that we actually prove that they're making a difference.
Sweet. I don't want to quash that conversation. I want to go on with that, but however, we don't have all night. Patrick, how do I get a genome sequence test done? Where, and do I need to have my parent take part? Also, the audio didn't come through the virtual session, so a couple of disappointed people there. But anyway.
That's why it's still good to meet in person.
Absolutely.
Yeah, again, that question touched on a really important point, is actually getting your genomic sequence is currently not Medicare covered. There's no Medicare coverage for epilepsy genome testing. So we had to do that as part of a clinical trial in order to do the whole genome sequencing for our patients. You can get coverage for some other conditions, but epilepsy still disappointing, not yet. So in our clinical trial, again, we embedded looking at the diagnostic rate and also what is the health economics. Does it make health economic sense? And our hope is then to put that into a piece of document that can be taken to the government and say, because it's actually very cost effective, you should provide some funding. So the moment it is disappointing, but I think I would say efforts being made. But at the moment you can still get testing through clinical genetics clinics around the countries, but that's funded within their health network, within the health service. It's not a Medicare billable item, so to speak. So it depends on the resources you have available. And obviously then otherwise, private testing is available, but we've just heard that it is a real financial burden. Again, this is an area that we really hope we could generate the evidence. That's what we're doing to allow us then go to Medicare to provide funding for the test.
Okay, so we add that to the list. Hey?
And you have to invite me back next time, as I said.
Absolutely, thank you. Chris, the Neuro Matters report and recommendations are Queensland focused. Will there be a rollout nationally? Is there interest in other states?
That was my question too. Yeah, it sounds really great. Can we have some in Victoria?
We are just ahead of the curve, and quite deliberately by design. So this process started some time ago, probably maybe 18 months into my tenure at EQ, so probably 3, maybe 4 years ago. When the Intersectoral Global Action Plan was released, right? So at the time, I had a seat at the International Bureau for Epilepsy, and they were one of the main proponents of that at the World Health Organization. It created this evidence-based framework that says, hey, this is good policy. Every member state of WHO signed up to it. So we're like, all right, great. What's Australia and Queensland doing about this? And so finally we had good grounded policy evidence to be able to say to government what the actual are you going to do about this, because it's time? So we actually started that conversation with health. At the time, I think Louise and I went and had a very interesting meeting with our friends at Health at the time, it was interesting, who didn't have a lot to say about the need for there to be a policy agenda shift. And that's why I'll be forever thankful for Max and his team to be receptive to the challenge that this community and neurological conditions generally faced. So we, at the time, wanted to create this momentum that said, we were politicising it, to be frank. There was an opportunity. We knew we were in the dying days of a particular flavour of government. We knew there was an election cycle coming up. Here was our come to Jesus moment to say, if this is the time, this is the time. So I think we wrote that report for Max and his team in about 6 weeks, which was fun. And it was the foundation of a completely different conversation. Was it perfect? No. Would we do it differently? We had more time? Sure. Would we have collaborated more broadly across the whole sector? Absolutely. But every time you add complexities to those conversations, they grind to a halt. That's just a factual reality. So alongside all of that, the National Neurological Alliance was forming. And in fact, 2 weeks ago, if you go and have a look at their website, they released a national blueprint for neurological action across the country. So the long answer to that question is there is now a blueprint published, co-designed across the sector, and that has been presented to the Australian government that says, here's your vehicle. You've signed up to this in terms of being a member state that agreed to the World Health Organisation's Intersectoral Global Action Plan. You have an obligation to implement this. Here's your blueprint. Our goal at the state level was to go, in a political way, here's your opportunity to get in front of this. We don't know when the national one's going to come. You could sit and be subservient to it and wait for it, or you could get in front of this. And a big reason why we pushed that was some of the stats I talked about earlier, where we know that we are the worst performing state in the country. Those stats might have shifted in the last couple of years since we did that data stuff, but that's a fact. So why wouldn't you want to do something about that?
Awesome. I would love to keep on talking and answer all these questions, but I fear our hospitality might run out of here at the Cricketers. So I'm going to call it and say thank you for answering the questions, and thank you to everybody for asking the questions. Just stay there for a sec. And I will close tonight. May I first of all offer a big thank you to our presenters, Professor Kwan, and to Chris, and to Louise for sharing her very personal epilepsy journey with us. It's always wonderful to hear how the real world is. Thank you to our sponsors, UCB. Rupert, thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you to the team at Epilepsy Queensland. Very selfishly, I say that, for pulling this evening together and for also continuing to walk with people on their epilepsy journey. Also like to thank the team at Queensland Cricketers for your hospitality, always lovely. And just a final word, I probably should put these people. We have heard tonight about why Neuro Matters. In Queensland, roughly 1 in 4 living with neurological conditions, and for many it can be more than just one condition. Can I ask you to please think about the people in your lives, your workplace, your schools, your community, and not the very least your family. This is not an isolated issue. It touches all of us. Come and stand at the barricade with us. For people with epilepsy, the journey can be long and challenging. Innovation in treatment and care is essential for improving outcomes and to and for giving hope. Like, the big thing for me tonight is always, when we gather, it is about collecting some more hope. Thank you, all of you, whether you're here in the room or virtually, for joining us tonight. And we're very grateful for all your faces. Thank you, everybody. Travel safe.